On a winter day in 2024, a man walks into a bar in tiny Daniel, Wyoming. In his arms is what appears to be a large dog. The animal looks dazed and unsteady. Its mouth is taped shut. But it isn't a dog. It's a wolf. The man, a local rancher, had chased it down and run it over with his snowmobile. Then he brought it into the bar to show it off. In photos and video from the evening, you can see the rancher posing with the wolf. You can also hear some people in the bar laughing. But even in an anti-wolf corner of the country like Daniel, this was too much for some people. A bartender asked the man to leave. The rancher left the bar, took the wolf out back, and shot it. Later, a bar patron reported the man to the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. The rancher was fined $250, a penalty wolf advocates saw as a slap on the wrist. The incident reverberated across the U.S.
Animal activists are outraged tonight after a young wolf was run over and then tortured to death in Wyoming.
One person who wasn't shocked was Doug Smith. He's been studying wolves for more than 40 years, and he says no other animal inspires the same bloodlust.
Prior to wolves being listed as an endangered species, they weren't just killed, they were tortured. I mean, people cut their lower jaws off and set them free, and they died that way. They would wire their jaws shut. They would take nails or razor blades and put it in hunks of meat, so they'd swallow the razor blades and nails. You know, this is human hatred.
And let's be clear, the wolf skeptics we've talked to in this podcast are moderates when it comes to anti-wolf sentiments. Folks who'd rather wolves hadn't come back, but are willing to coexist. There are also plenty of people with more extreme feelings out there. There's a bumper sticker I used to see a lot in Idaho. It says, shoot, shovel, shut up. As in, poach wolves, bury the evidence, and keep quiet. But shoot, shovel, shut up doesn't really ring true anymore. These days, there's usually no need to shut up, let alone shovel. Killing wolves in Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming is pretty much open season. The laws have been relaxed so much in recent years that you can use just about any method you want to kill wolves, other than poison, including running them over with your snowmobile. That's right, what the rancher did to that wolf on his snowmobile, perfectly legal.
Now, the man involved was fined $250 by Wyoming officials for possessing a live wild animal.
He wasn't ticketed for running over the wolf or killing it. All of that was allowed. Where he messed up was parading it around while it was still breathing. Doug says he's seen this hatred of wolves up close, with a fellow ranger in Yellowstone.
And that ranger was a friend of mine, but he hated wolves. He hated them. And I rode this country with him. He shot a wolf legally one time. Well, he would argue he shot two wolves, both legally. It was the second one he shot that really blew things up.
Here's what happened. It was January 2022, and this Yellowstone ranger named Brian Helms was getting close to the end of his shift. Brian worked as a backcountry ranger, meaning he spent a lot of time in remote areas and knew the terrain and the wildlife well. That day, a wolf known as 1233 was on the move in a remote northeast corner of the park. As a backcountry ranger, Brian was in a particularly good position to know this.
He was on duty. He saw the wolf approaching the park line. He went off duty, changed his clothes, came back, shot the wolf tens of feet across the line.
Not surprisingly, this was a national scandal when The Intercept broke the story. The headline, "Ranger Kills Yellowstone Wolf," was a bad look for the park and its employees. Brian resigned amid intense public pressure.
He rode the fine line between doing his job as a law enforcement ranger and in his personal life hating wolves. And I think he kind of messed up on that line.
I reached out to Brian numerous times, but didn't hear back. In past interviews, he's called the criticism of his wolf kill a, quote, witch hunt. And indeed, Brian was never charged for the killing. When Brian shot that wolf, it was the culmination of the deadliest hunting season on record for Montana wolves. That included 25 Yellowstone wolves who strayed over the park boundary, the biggest loss for them since reintroduction. Doug says it was a coordinated effort by wolf haters outside the park. He says they would lie in wait for wolves to leave Yellowstone.
So you have to watch the park line every frickin' day. And so people do it all winter. And when they come out, whoosh, the cell phones start buzzing. And someone will ride in or someone will show up at... And the other problem is there's two main pinch points that all the wildlife come out of the park on. Whether they're elk or pronghorn or bison or wolves, the landscape funnels them into two main areas. So the wolf hunters go to those areas and shoot them because there's someone out looking for them every day.
There's some question as to whether some of the hunters are breaking the law by coordinating hunts with cell phones. But in general, killing the wolves is legal once they leave the park. So what does all this hunting of wolves mean for their future? In the push and pull between the pro and anti-wolf factions, who is winning? The official count makes it look like wolves are thriving. But some researchers say those figures are a mirage based on faulty data. And so, 30 years into this reintroduction experiment, wolves may be in trouble again. I'm Heath Drusen from Boise State Public Radio and the Idaho Capital Sun. This is Howl, the story of nature's greatest comeback, what it's meant for the West, and how it could all be undone. Episode 5, Ghost Wolves. Christian nationalists want to turn America into a theocracy, a government under biblical rule. If they gain more power, it could mean fewer rights for you. I'm Heath Drusen, and on the new season of Extremely American, I'll take you inside the movement. Listen to Extremely American from Boise State Public Radio, part of the NPR network. Ever since wolves were removed from the endangered species list in 2011, hunting them has been popular. Some sportsmen are looking for trophies, others after the valuable fur. Idaho alone sold more than 53,000 wolf tags in 2024. To be clear, part of the draw is the challenge. Wolves are some of the hardest animals to find. Remember what Idaho's top trapper, Rusty Kramer, said last episode?
I don't hate wolves. I admire wolves, how far they can roam and how cunning they are and survive out there.
Indeed, less than 1% of Idahoans who buy a wolf tag actually are able to bag a wolf. But the challenge isn't the only reason for killing wolves. There are hunters and ranchers who just want to get rid of them completely.
In my opinion, it's a form of retribution. Idaho, Montana, Wyoming really weren't behind any of this wolf reintroduction. There was a resistance to it. And it went ahead and happened. The federal government reintroduced wolves to the West.
That's Carter Niemeyer, that former trapper turned wolf advocate we've heard from before. Remember the guy who delivered a porcupine through C-section? Who brushed off frostbite while leading the effort to trap wolves in Canada? And he points out that despite how difficult it is to find wolves, hunters and trappers still kill a lot of them. An average of more than 400 wolves each year since 2019 in Idaho alone. To put that in perspective, that's about a third of the wolves Idaho estimates are in the state right now. Wolves do balance it out to some degree with their impressive reproduction. When a lot of wolves in an area die, the surviving females tend to make up for it by having more pups. But Carter says he's seeing fewer wolves. And given he's one of the best people in America at finding wolves, he thinks something is amiss. So we decided to go out with him into Idaho's backcountry to see for ourselves. To use Carter's famous tracking skills to see if we could find a wolf, or at least see where they used to be. We meet him on the side of one of Idaho's many dirt roads to nowhere. Hey Carter, how you doing?
Good. Good.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you all.
Been on a lot of back roads here, but I've actually never been up here.
Well, used to be a lot of wolf activity up here back in the day.
And here we go. And we follow behind Carter's truck deep into the backcountry. We wind up the meandering gravel track to a remote area in Idaho where Carter's been observing wolves for nearly a quarter century. He took us there on the condition that we don't get too specific about the location. He's worried about hunters using his intel to go kill wolves there. So we're gonna be cagey about where it is. But it's in central Idaho, where a patchwork of national forest land dominates the map. It's wild country, a mix of forested mountains and marshy valleys miles away from any human habitation. The search for wolves started as soon as our cars hit the dirt road. Carter is skilled enough that he can track animals from a moving vehicle.
I can be driving 30 miles an hour and see a fresh wolf track on the road. They just leave an impression on my brain that you go, that's a wolf track.
Pretty quickly, he proved his point, coming to an abrupt stop. He jumped out of the car, squatted down, and pointed at a spot on the road.
This looks potentially like could be wolf shit. Oh, wow. There's a wolf track right here.
The track and scat is fresh. The wolf had been there that morning. It's a fast start and gets our hopes up for seeing one of these elusive animals. Carter howls to see if he can get a response from the wolf that was walking the road. He shares some tips with Clark.
You pressing your lips together or just cupping your hands?
What's that?
For your technique on your howl, are you pressing your lips together or just cupping your hands?
I'm just kind of trying to funnel it out.
Yeah.
I can howl better if I had some practice. I haven't howled for so long, my voice is about half cracked up.
Then Carter howls again. But nothing. So we continue down the road. We drive and walk for hours, looking and howling, to places where Carter has seen wolves in the past. But the trail runs cold. We camp in the area and search for a second day, but come up empty. Just a few years ago, this place was so reliable for wolf sightings, Carter used it as a kind of safari park. He would take wealthy people there who had bid on guided wolf experiences at conservation fundraisers.
People would pay thousands of dollars, and so we'd camp out for 2-3 days, cook for them. Yeah, I don't think we ever failed in seeing wolves, hearing wolves.
Wow.
But that was then, and this is now.
Now, Carter says he almost never sees them. He listed off a number of formerly reliable spots that have little sign of wolves these days. He knows the names of just about every wolf pack in Idaho, and he lists off a bunch he doesn't see anymore.
The Big Buck Pack, Steel Mountain Pack, Jackson Pack, Archie Pack. I can name all these packs up there. There's no packs in those places anymore.
He says recreational hunters are taking a toll, as are government trappers sent out to kill wolves accused of killing livestock. He thinks there are far fewer wolves than the official numbers say.
You'll still find a wolf track up in that country, but to say there's anything like the numbers there were, I don't believe it. You wouldn't convince me.
And Carter's not alone in that suspicion. We talked to several other Idaho wolf experts who said the same thing. They're just not seeing wolves in the places they used to be. And recent research supports that hunch. That's next, after the break. The official estimate today puts the wolf population at around 3,400 across 9 western states, not counting Alaska. That's an incredible recovery for an animal that was all but exterminated here 30 years ago. Wolf populations have grown exponentially since 1995, and they've spread hundreds of miles beyond their initial release sites. No one disputes that. But two leading wolf researchers found that the official numbers may be wildly inaccurate. Their studies focused on Idaho and Montana, two states that account for about 70% of western wolves. If we don't know how many wolves are in those two states, then we don't really know how wolves are doing in the West.
My name is Scott Creel. I'm an ecologist and conservation biologist, and I work for Montana State University. My background is that I've been studying behavior and ecology and conservation of carnivores since 1987.
Scott is one of those researchers. He's one of the most prominent predator experts in the U.S., and his research has taken him to wild places from the Rocky Mountains to southern Africa. He began looking into the wolf numbers when several people tipped him off that Idaho and Montana might be using unreliable methods to estimate their populations.
I was particularly worried that the methods I was seeing used would produce estimates that wouldn't change, even if the wolf numbers were really changing.
I'm just going to quickly explain a little about the science of estimating animal populations. First off, for the most part, wildlife can't actually be counted. Scientists can only make an educated guess. That's because wild animals move around, live in remote places, and generally have babies out of sight of any human. This is especially true of elusive predators like wolves. Their populations are smaller and more dispersed than herd animals, like elk and deer. So researchers need to come up with clever ways of estimating population size.
It's a very hard job, and anyone would have a hard time coming up with a good estimate of wolf numbers for the entire state of Montana or the entire state of Idaho, including me.
The system Idaho used until recently was to set up cameras in remote, difficult-to-reach places throughout the state.
What they did is they took this approach that's called a space-to-event model, which is a really oblique way of saying that you put a bunch of camera traps out on the landscape, and you just basically estimate how big an area you got to look at in the photos before you see a wolf.
Some of those cameras capture photos of wolves. Many more don't. If conducted correctly, the results give wildlife management experts a pretty good sense of how many wolves are out there. But for the camera system to work, they must be randomly placed and randomly take photos. Scott says Idaho did not do this.
What they did instead is let them be motion sensitive. So the camera takes a picture when an animal walks in front of it. That's violating an assumption of the model. They're no longer being taken at random times. They also didn't put them in random places. They put them in places they expected to find wolves.
For example, Scott says Fish and Game put some cameras near wolf dens.
So you violated the two most fundamental assumptions of the method. For it to estimate how many wolves are in a given square kilometer, you got to look at random times and places. They didn't do either one.
But Scott has faced pushback from the agencies he says he's trying to help. We spoke with Idaho Department of Fish and Game Wildlife Bureau Chief Shane Roberts, who said localized tests of their methods backed up their numbers.
No, I don't believe there are more than our estimate says, or that our estimate was an overestimate. I can definitely tell you I don't think there's anybody that puts in more effort to rigorously evaluating our estimate than we do.
Roberts and other Fish and Game officials we spoke to also point out that Scott's study has not been peer-reviewed. Scott said because of the length of the peer review process, he decided to release his findings first. He hoped wildlife officials would use his study to do a better job. Though Idaho officials say their camera method was accurate, they did recently drop it for a new way to estimate wolves. Now, they rely on DNA testing of wolves killed by hunters and trappers. They use the genetic and age information from the wolves to feed a computer modeling program. Scott says DNA testing can be a good way to estimate population, just like camera traps. But again, only if you use proper methodology. Idaho Fish and Game officials say they are waiting on peer review of their DNA methods. But those disputed camera numbers they gathered for years, that data is informing current policy. Another researcher, Bob Crabtree, found problems with neighboring Montana's method of estimating wolves. He's the founder of the Yellowstone Ecological Research Center. Montana relies largely on hunters reporting wolf sightings. And Bob thinks that's an unreliable approach.
It's constructive criticism and meant to make recommendations to improve their method.
Bob's initial study found that Montana's actual wolf population may be less than half of their official estimate. That would mean more than 650 ghost wolves in Montana alone, 13% of the entire western population estimate. The Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks declined an interview request. In the past, they have disputed Bob's findings. Can you explain in layman's terms why it's important that states do an as accurate account as they can of wolves? What is the tangible problem of having an overcount of wolves?
Oh, it's like asking a business owner to try to make a profit by not knowing what items they have on the shelves that they stock in their store. Population size or abundance is the number one criteria used to successfully manage and conserve and restore wolves. And without it, you can't.
Researchers in the West, like Bob and Scott, also told me there's political pressure to avoid wolf research altogether. And in fact, several years ago, a Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks administrator wrote to Scott's university. He threatened to, quote, permanently and completely dissolve the financial and intellectual relationship between the agency and Montana State University because of Scott's work.
The director of FWP wrote to the president of the university to complain about me publishing analyses like the report that you guys are looking at, and basically arguing that I was attempting to undermine and discredit the agency. And that's absolutely not my intention at all. I think there's a little bit this shoot the messenger reaction from the state agencies. I think there's a little bit of a tendency to protect the agency first and the agency personnel second, and then the animals third. It does worry me a little bit.
And Scott says the research he's done has been ignored by the very wildlife agencies he's trying to help. The pressure, the feeling of being ignored, that's why Scott doesn't study wolves anymore.
The cynical part of me thinks maybe the agencies want models that don't see changes in population size because it just keeps the complaining down to a dull roar.
These days, he's studying wild dogs in southern Africa.
I switched back to working on African carnivores, partly out of frustration on being unable to move the needle on policies for wolf management. And I felt like I could be more effective working in Africa to get my work taken up into policy.
There's only so many academics studying wolves in the U.S., so the loss of a Scott Creel represents a significant brain drain. And it comes at a time when states are radically changing how they manage wolves. Idaho's official policy is to kill up to 70% of the estimated wolves in the state. Idaho wants to bring its wolf population from the current official estimate of 1,150 to as low as 350 animals. Wolf advocates call it a massacre. Idaho Fish and Game Deputy Director of Operations John Rochelle says his agency will never please everyone with their policies.
We still today have people who don't think any wolves should be killed for any reason. We could conceivably manage that way, but it's not realistic. On the other side, we have people who don't want to have any wolves and never did. So we seem to be in this position where we're expected to find this magical balance between not enough and too many.
But John is clear that he thinks there are too many wolves in Idaho and across the West.
Looking at the available habitat and those other potential conflicts, they felt like more than 500 in Idaho, more than 1,500 in the Northern Rockies was going to create a situation where there were persistent conflicts, and that would result in a need for management to reduce wolves.
Just a reminder, by conflicts, he means wolves eating livestock.
Wolf populations at a higher number than that also are going to be exhibiting pressures on the ungulate populations, deer and elk, primarily elk in Idaho, and resulting in population declines there that aren't going to be suitable for the segment of our population that enjoys hunting.
As far as what is an acceptable level of conflicts with ranchers, that's of course highly subjective. But no scientist we talk to outside of Idaho Fish and Game thinks there are more wolves than the habitat can handle. And none of them think wolves are a threat to elk and deer populations. Quite the opposite. But they are concerned about the number of wolves being killed and the potential harm it can do. Scott Creel, the researcher, says wolves are resilient, which is helping mitigate that harm.
The good news for them is that, what it took to eradicate them the first time was pretty horrific. And we're nowhere near that right now. But again, it does concern me that every year the policies just head a little bit farther in that direction. We know we can eradicate them. We did it.
I started the season on the trail, immersed in wolf howls. But as my search went on, it became a lot harder to find wolves. Wolves have thrived, but a lot of their gains were achieved under the protection of the Endangered Species Act. Remember, for the most part, you could not legally kill a wolf for more than 15 years after reintroduction. Now, that's been turned on its head. In states like Idaho, they are less protected than most other game animals. One example wolf advocates point to is that a hunter can legally go to a den and wipe out a litter of pups. So the story of wolves is a paradox. They represent perhaps nature's greatest comeback, but their future is uncertain. Back on the Nez Perce Reservation, the people who helped bring wolves back to the West are worried that their efforts are being reversed. I followed up with Marcy Carter, who monitored wolves for the tribe in the early days of reintroduction. Are you concerned that the work you guys did is being undone right now?
Oh yes, it's definitely being undone. It's been being undone since we stepped out. I think that the state of Idaho is going to plunge, if they haven't already, plunge wolves back towards extinction, at least in Idaho.
She said it pains her to see what she calls a slaughter.
It's it's very expensive to recover wolves, and it's not very expensive to take them off the landscape. It's really, I have to put a wall up and not think about it, because it really is upsetting.
And members of the tribe say they are not being consulted on wolf decisions. Decisions that affect the hunting and fishing grounds they were promised in an 1855 treaty with the United States. As part of the treaty, the Nez Perce agreed to cede much of their land in return for ongoing sovereignty over a smaller reservation. James Holt says the tribe being cut out of wolf decisions is especially offensive given their millennia-long relationship with the land. He's the Nez Perce member we heard from earlier in the series, whose family lived by traditional ways until the 1940s.
I think that's a big black eye on the state to say that there's this huge swath in central Idaho, that's the Nez Perce homelands, definitely the Treaty of 1855 grounds, and we have no voice right now with the state and wolf management. And it reflects that in the way that their heavy-handed actions come down on, obliterating wolf packs, going into the dens and killing pups. I mean, how atrocious can you get? But here we are.
The chairman of the Nez Perce, Shannon Wheeler, goes farther, saying the wolf killing represents a breach of the agreement between the tribe and America.
Is it a violation of our treaty? Is it a violation of something that we were meant to protect? Of course it is.
We asked Idaho Governor Brad Little about this. He was kind of dismissive. Said tribal members could attend a fish and game meeting, like any other member of the public.
They're sovereign, and if they, the Fish and Game Commission, who runs the Department of Fish and Game, they have all kinds of forums all over the state, and the biologists, biologists for the Fish and Game, they have all kinds of relationships with the tribes on anadromous fish, on other hunting. So I would be surprised if there hasn't been some kind of a dialogue.
So, where are we in the wolf story? They came back to the West, and they proliferated more than anyone imagined. Wolves brought balance back to the ecosystem, and even helped forests regrow. Some also ate livestock and hurt ranchers and farmers' bottom lines. They also created a whole new crop of ecotourists. And so, what's next for wolves? Doug Smith, the biologist who oversaw Yellowstone's wolves for nearly 30 years, wishes he had more certainty.
I'm worried about the future because the most important thing for wolf restoration is human attitudes. And human attitudes have not changed about wolves. One of my favorite sound bites when I started working in Yellowstone 30 years ago was, I hope in 30 years some of the controversy has died down and people have gotten used to the ideas that wolves aren't that bad. And that hasn't happened at all. They are still hated as much as they were 30 years ago. They're still a political football. They're still controversial. They don't have to be.
But there are some signs of acceptance from wolf skeptics. Remember Jay Smith, the Idaho rancher who opposed reintroduction? He's the one who told me,
I think that misuse of the Endangered Species Act is economic and domestic terrorism.
It's not like he's taken back that opposition. But I asked Jay about his ideal wolf scenario, and he had an answer that kind of surprised me. Would you like to see less of them? Like, what's your ideal sort of management plan?
My honest answer is we had depredation when there were 35 wolves in the state of Idaho. We're never going to get down to 35 again, and so I do not have a target number. My goal is to be able to protect my livestock, protect my family, and make a living. And so you can have 10,000 of them if they leave me alone.
He says he's doing his part to coexist with wolves.
We've adjusted our business plans to know that there's going to be some. And then with that said, we expect cooperation from our federal and state partners to help us minimize that.
As we've heard, wolves evoke feelings of both love and hate like no other animal. People have argued about how to live with them since the government put them back on the landscape 30 years ago. Assuming we don't kill them off again, there's a good chance we'll be arguing about it for 30 more. Howl was created by me, Heath Drusen. It was written and reported by me and Clark Corbin. Johanna Zorn edited Howl. Mixing and sound engineering by James Dawson. Make sure to check out the companion written series at idahocapitalsun.com. That's capital with an A. It's different than the podcast and well worth checking out. Music from Artlist. Additional reporting from Mary Ellen Pitney. Thanks to Sasha Woodruff, Christina Lords, Tom Michael, Julie Luqueta, Kyle Faunensteel, Katie Kloppenberg, and Lacey Daly. Special thanks to Morgan Springer. Howl is part of the Boise State Public Radio podcast family. It's hosted in partnership with the Idaho Capital Sun, part of the state's newsroom network. Howl was edited with assistance from the editor corps of the Public Media Journalists Association, with support from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people. It was also supported by a grant from the Fund for Investigative Journalism.
These days, there's so much news, it can be hard to keep up with what it all means for you, your family, and your community. The Consider This podcast from NPR features our award-winning journalism. 6 days a week, we bring you a deep dive on a news story and provide the context and analysis that helps you make sense of the news. We get behind the headlines. We get to the truth. Listen to the Consider This podcast from NPR.